Okay, so that's point of interest. Hopefully that made it a little bit more sense than me doing my arms, right? Okay. So when we talk about 12 Angry Men in the movie, Juror 8 was showing his inductive reasoning by saying, hey, here's more evidence. And as they were getting more evidence than the original evidence, remember they just had that first piece, but as they started to gather more, they started to see the bigger picture. And as they got the bigger picture, they were able to go, oh, our first initial thought on this was incorrect, right? So the more evidence you get, the more you're going to come to, again, maybe that point of intersection where you're like, wow, the more I get, the more I know. All right, so look for the most evidence. We want the quantity sample, right? As much as we can get to make the best judgment. The more, the better, okay? Normally I'm a quality over quantity, but you know. Real quick, let's just kind of cover the vocabulary because obviously it's going to be in the quiz right after this. We have either statistical evidence and statistical generalization. Okay, so statistical evidence is the data. Statistical evidence is that data you're getting, whether you're doing polling or research, whatever it is that you are gathering, right? The statistical evidence helps you to make statistical generalizations. And again, I'm not one to like, hey, we should generalize all things, but the more information we get, the more we are able to make a more accurate generalization, okay? Now, statistical generalization, all right, we had statistical evidence, which is the data. Now we have the statistical generation, oh, I'm sorry, heavens to Betsy, give me 1 second. Statistical generalization, thank you very much, is our inferences that are drawn from the evidence, right? So we can come up with our statistical generalization based on the data, which is statistical evidence, right? Okay, evidence, generalization, two different things. All right, and again, we're doing statistics, meaning the more we get, the more information we gather. That's how we're coming up with, again, the data and the generalization. Okay, characteristic of interest, not just characteristic. I want characteristic of interest. And I really am pushing this because I notice with students, they just do characteristic. I want characteristic of interest. It's a specific question the research is seeking to answer, okay, given a certain population. Okay, so the characteristic of interest is that question that the researcher is trying to answer that's concerning a certain population. And that certain population is target population, okay? Target population is the group that the researcher wishes to generalize. And the way they're generalizing it is based on statistical evidence. The more information they get, the more they can come up with a statistical generalization based on a characteristic of interest on a target population. I hope this is making sense to you. I'm trying to tie it all together. Okay, now the sample is what you're pulling from the target population, all right? So a sample is the members of the target population who are studied by the researcher. So here's the problem with that. We've got this target population and we want to pull a sample. But unfortunately, if you're not careful, you can pull the wrong sample and get the wrong data. Well, how do you accidentally pull the wrong sample? Well, you're pulling the wrong sample by not being random. Okay, what we want is randomness. Okay, and when you go take a look at the book, you're going to see, I have to find the page, I can't remember. I should have it memorized because I'm in this book all the time. But you're going to notice that difference between pulling. So I'll give you an example. Butte College. We're trying to figure out how many students chew gum, right? Because I'm sick of walking around and stepping in the gum because people are spitting it out. I'm like, okay, how many of you are gum chewers? All right, so we've got the Glenn Center, we have the Chico Center, and then we have the main campus. All right, so we have 3 different places, okay? And so if I'm going to do a poll or any kind of research or polling of data, and all I do is pull from the Chico Center, is that going to be an accurate sample of those who are at the Glenn Center or on the main campus? Well, I'm only pulling from one place. I'm not getting random sample, right? I'm not getting enough of all of the different types of students at Butte College. So if I'm just pulling from Chico, the Chico Center, it's probably not going to be as accurate as if I did a random sample of all of the target population, which is the Butte College, okay? So the sample I want to choose needs to be random, and random would be a condition that allows every member of the target population to have an equal chance of being a part of the sample. So I should be able to pull from all over, whether it's Glenn, Butte, or Chico Center, and as random as possible. Everybody gets an opportunity to be chosen, right? And it's just random, just, closing my eyes and pointing kind of thing. And if that is how I'm going to get my data, right, my statistical evidence, so that I can come up with a statistical generalization, all right, about a target population, okay? And, that characteristic of interest would be who is chewing the gum, right? And then who's discarding it on the floor versus putting it in the garbage, right? That is how I would be able to make that statistical generalization, all right, based on that random sample, random all over, all Butte, okay? The sample is my target population, which is again all of Butte College students. Characteristic: who's chewing the gum, who's spitting it out, okay? One thing to be mindful is if I'm only choosing that Chico Center, I'm biased, right? Because I teach at the Chico Center, right? And I'm not able to get to Glenn or the main campus. So I'm just choosing, the Chico Center. Well, that's biased, because that is not reflecting a random representation of the whole population, of the target population. Does that make sense? Okay. You know what I'm saying? All right, so that is the vocabulary, and I'm hoping this helps you kind of like grind it into your brain so that you can apply it. I'm going to give it a quick simplify, I'm going to simplify it really quick, where the characteristic of interest. What do I want to find out? What's my question? So the characteristic of interest is the question you're trying to ask. Who's chewing the gum? That's what I want to know. All right, now my target population is, whom do I want to know about? Well, my target population is the students at Butte campus. Now the sample would be, whom can I study to get accurate answers about my target population, right? So what's my sample? Where am I going? Well, I got to go to Chico. I got to go to Butte. And I'm not saying it can't be students online. There's some students who do online and in person, but because I want to know who's spitting out the gum, it's got to be students who are actually attending in classes, right? So I'd have to go around and see anyone who's walking around, and different times, got to do the morning, the afternoon, the evening, right? You really want to make sure you get as many pieces, okay, of this target population, as many samples, as much random as you can do of a target population, so that I can figure out my characteristic of interest, which is, what do I want to find out, okay? Hopefully that helps you. Okay. All right. Again, a sample, it needs to represent the target population. Look at pages 134 there. And if you draw a conclusion from your research, it needs to reflect the entire target group. Okay. So that's why the sample is important. It needs to make sure it covers everybody. Again, 134. So must have the same characteristics in the same proportion. So I have to, again, random, but equal in some way. Similarities do matter, and if it doesn't follow a certain criteria, the criteria I just gave above, it's going to be biased. So I make sure it's all the things. Think of entropy. Entropy, where everything wants to disperse evenly. That's your goal, is trying to get all the information as it's dispersed evenly. A biased sample does not provide adequate evidence. So if I'm to support your conclusion, so what's my conclusion on the gum? Well, if I'm only pulling from the Chico Center, it's an absolute biased data, and it's not going to represent that target population. So my research is flawed, right? It's not giving an accurate vision of what it is I'm trying to say. So keep that in mind when you think of research as you move forward in either your academic career or even in this class, right? Where you're pulling data and research from, like, where is it coming from? Okay. And is it random? And so random allows you to use a smaller sample size. I'd love to pull every single student at Chico or at Butte I teach at Butte, or I work at Chico State too, so I get confused sometimes. Anyway, so if I'm wanting to get it as random as possible, I have to make sure that I give myself that opportunity, but also recognize the fact that if it's random, I can go smaller. So instead of doing getting all of the students from Butte College, like every single student, if I can go and get as random as possible, I can do a smaller thing. So you might see, sometimes there'll be data and research where there's only 1,000 people who are polled or researched on something. And you're like, oh, 1,000 people, that doesn't really feel like it represents me. But if you do it right and you do it random enough and it really is focusing on that target population, it can work. Okay, so keep that in mind. I oftentimes, when I see research and I see data and like, oh, they polled 20 people, I'm like, yeah, but 20 people where? Was it a bunch of like students in the South coming out of, a restaurant or something? Does that represent who I am? Like, I don't know, right? Like, it would seem that just those 20 people in that one small space in all of the United States doesn't feel like a true representation. So it'd have to be all throughout the United States, different types of jobs, different types of diversity, right? You want as random as possible. You might get away with about 1,000, but anything less might seem, I don't know, unless it's certain kind of, what do you call it? Like science in the sense of doing, and we'll get into that in the next few chapters, where you do actual medical stuff. Sometimes you can't get up to 1,000 people, whether it's money or time or whatever the case may be. Okay, so truly random sample is generally representative of the target population. I've said that 1,000 times. The random samples of target population reduces the possibility of errors, right? The more random, the more accurate. That's our goal. Okay, and the margin of error decreases as the random representative sample increases. So again, more random, more, when we talk about, remember that point of intersection, the more we get, the more likely we're going to become more accurate, less margins of error. Okay, I hope that helps. This is not easy stuff. This is not intuitive. So if at first you're like, what the fuck? Don't worry, just keep reading and watching and listening. That'll help you. Okay, so what other ways do we use statistics, right? Some of you might be in statistics. I've taken statistics at Butte. I have 2 master's degrees and I was not very good at statistics. If that helps you at all. It's kind of hard because it's just a different way of thinking. It's not just the math, it's the statistics, it's the data that you're receiving. So many of you love football. I'm sure there's a lot of you. I have a lot of students who do, not even just students, friends, family, they all do fantasy football. Way into it, way into the statistics. Same things with like baseball. Sports in general is statistic based, right? So that's really how the gambling and all that good stuff works. So sports, even in an individual, right? So for fantasy football, an individual will have a certain statistic, and then you get them, you put them on your team, and your team wins, you get money, whatever. I don't do it, so I don't know. So, because I don't have any money. But anyway. All right, politics for sure. They're always polling people. They're always trying to figure out who's going to be voting what, who goes for this, who goes for that, right? So you're going to see it in politics. Sometimes you'll see it in like a workplace, right? Because you're trying to pull maybe a popularity of certain benefits for, your company. I don't know if any of you, maybe if you worked at like Lowe's or something, they'll do a survey on how you feel about your job and what do you think works and doesn't work. And so they use that polling to make decisions for you. All right. Sometimes on healthcare issues too, business and profit analysis, and then advertising. All right. So advertising for sure. Oh, I'm so excited. When we get into the advertising, you're going to love it. It's like my favorite thing. And like once you learn stuff about advertising, you see things in a completely different light. So anyway, when we do advertising, statistics in why are people buying certain things, or again, man, maybe it's the retail person. I used to work in retail a lot, but like statistics of how often are people looking at side stacks. I don't know if you know side stacks. You probably walk past them 1,000 times and don't realize they're there. Or like J hooks. It's the hooks that are on next to the shelves, right? And you walk by and you're like, oh, I needed that, right? Like, I don't know. 3M. A lot of times 3M stickies are there. Side stacks are going to be cleaning supplies, right? All these things. So they think of the statistics of where you would put that and how often it gets pulled, whether an item on the shelf gets pulled better if it's on the bottom, on the top, in the center, like what is that? That's why you see a lot of times people are always doing resets. They're resetting these shelves so that people will, oh, I didn't see that before, and they grab it because it's eye length, or maybe they're used to looking down, for a certain product, and then that changes how they're purchasing. Advertising, right? It's all about the money. Okay, let's see here. One thing to be mindful is to make sure we're not saying the words like prove. Like I might have said that maybe once or twice and you'll catch me going, oh, I didn't mean prove, that wasn't it. Proving anything like, okay, results don't prove things, right? When we saw that point of intersection, it supports evidence, but it doesn't prove anything, because the more we get, the more we know, right? So we're like, look, I'm just saying that this evidence that I'm gathering is supporting my conclusion. It's supporting my findings. It's suggesting this based on the information that I have. Doesn't necessarily prove it. Okay, so we have to be mindful of that when we're talking about inductive reasoning. All right. Let's see here. Y'all, I think that was it for this this week's lecture. Only 15 minutes. Hallelujah. Amen. I'm so happy. Okay. All right. So go ahead and take a look at that. You're going to be using a lot of that, these terms, especially in Dallas Buyers Club. So go ahead, take a look at that, and we'll start working on chapter 6 when you're done. All right.